Thank you all for joining us today and dedicating your Sunday to gain more insights about mental health. That too from the experts in the field. So yeah, this webinar is being organized by Health of Mind. Health of Mind is a mental wellness startup based in Bangalore. Our efforts are directed towards creating awareness about mental health and well-being in children, men, women, teens across the nation. We aspire to build an ecosystem that to tackle their mental health problems while fighting the stigma around it. So we strive to be a one-stop solution for all mental wellness related concerns and are looking to collaborate with purpose-driven individuals and organizations who share our vision to effectuate a mentally healthy India. We want to look at mental wellness from a holistic perspective, and that's differentiate us from others and make us unique. So today we have two very eminent personalities in this space with us. Is Dr. Sciences for over 2 decades. She holds a doctorate degree from NIMHANS, Bangalore. She has authored 3 books and co-authored several others. Currently, she's a professor at the Center for Equity and Justice Family at the field of disability and mental health. And that is based on universal values of justice, equity, and inclusion. Thank you, Dr. Srilata, for joining us today. It's an honor, really.
Thank you.
So yeah, we have another panelist with us, Ms. Chitra Lakshman. She holds a master's degree in social work from MS University, Vadodara, with 25 years of experience in the field of disability. She is an honorary director of Vidya Vardhini Foundation Trust and runs a community health, mental health clinic, which is based on principles of justice, inclusion, and aims at building the agency of people with mental illness and their families to lead a life with dignity and full potential. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us today. It's really lovely to have you.
Thank you.
So yeah. So now, if you have any questions during this webinar, please post those in the Q&A section. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible. And now I just want to make sure that we are perfectly visible and audible to everyone. So please type 1 in the chat box if we are.
So are we ready to go?
Yeah. Okay. Great, everyone. Yeah, so let's dive straight into the topic. That is making the invisible visible, transforming mental health and fostering full potential. So yeah, ma'am, over to you.
So good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ravi Kumar, Surat Sharma, Jyoti Arora, and Konak Samuel for inviting us to the webinar today. The title of our webinar is Making the Invisible Now Visible, Transforming Mental Health and Fostering Full Potential. My name is Chitra, and I care deeply about the happiness and dignity of myself and others. Srilata?
My name is Kriti, and I care deeply about fairness, full potential, and dignity for myself and the world.
The flow of the webinar is going to be like this. We're going to talk about visibility and invisibility. What is invisible now and how we're going to make it visible. Why unpacking mental health is important. To talk openly about mental health. To change our view. And why we need to address mental health and make our work fair and just for people living with mental illness. We're going to share 2 frameworks with you and design models. One is the conscious full spectrum response model, which will help us to generate sustainable and equitable results and to design our work, and a respond in a realized framework, which will enable us to amplify the good that we are doing. And lastly, how to be in action every day, every time, everywhere. Next slide, please. I want to share certain facts and data with you. 1 suicide every 4 seconds in the world today. In the year 2019, there were 139,123 deaths. Out of these, there were 93,016 deaths, that is 67% by youngsters between the age of 18 to 45 years. 1 student dies every hour in our country. The recent Indian Psychiatric Society says that there's been an increase by 20% in the mental health problems in our country. Next slide, please. Yeah, Srilata?
Invisible for us. A lot of times when we look at illness, we know, for example, if I have polio, you see a visible difficulty that I have or an impairment that I have. If I have a headache, you know where my head is, so you know that there is a problem there. But where is our mind? Because we associate mental health with our mind. Where is our mind? Can we even locate it? Typically, mind consists of our thoughts, our emotions, the sensations we experience in our body, and our behavior. More often than not, the mental health is expressed in the form of behavior. And therefore, there's often a confusion between willful or deliberate behavior and an illness. So that takes us to what is illness and what is wellness. It is important for us to know that the wellness and illness is a process, it's a continuum, and it's not a static state. There are periods when I'm well, and there are periods when I'm ill. There are periods it's good to be okay, and there are periods when it's okay not to be okay. So I fluctuate, or I'm sorry, not fluctuate. I dance across the continuum of wellness and illness. However, when I'm not okay for a very long period of time, that is when we need to call our attention, draw our attention to it, and deal with it. So when we understand that mental health and mental illness is a continuum, because of the way we understand this continuum and because of the polarity that we see in wellness and illness, these are reinforced by stigma and exclusion. Whether it is the fact that I'm not able to function like everyone else is because of my mental illness, or because of the myths around mental illness and mental health. I request Chitra to share a few examples related to mental illness and stigma related to mental illness.
Mental health stigma runs deep in our country, in our society. I had a client, a 19-year-old young girl with multiple disability, coming to me for vocational training and therapy in one of the institutions. When I was interacting with the mother, doing a case history, the mother told me that she had an older daughter with severe mental retardation and was in an institution, in a home in Kerala, because she could not manage two girls with intellectual impairment. I asked the mother, how did she have these children? What was the reason? What was her husband doing? She told me that her husband had schizophrenia and was on medication even before the marriage. Had she known this before the marriage, her whole decision would have been different. She would have handled the situation differently. But she was trapped into this marriage, and she and her family were not told about it. Such is the stigma that people want to hide mental health issues and do not want to discuss it in the open. People need to know the truth about mental illness and need to seek help if they have a mental health issue in the family. Yes.
So when we make visible what is invisible, that is when we have a mental illness and we talk about it and make it a normal affair, just like how I have a headache or I have a diabetes. So when I talk about it and make it visible, then it's one way to see stigma and to make what is not okay, okay, and it's okay not to be okay. Let us understand how we can unpack mental illness. And the WHO in 2003 gives us a very beautiful and a comprehensive definition of what mental health is. And we're going to look at each of these in greater detail. So it says mental health is a state of well-being and very key well-being where individuals recognize their ability, they're able to cope with the normal quote-unquote stresses of life, work productively and fruitfully, and make a contribution to the community. So let's take the first point, which is recognizing one's ability. When I discover the true purpose of my life, I'm able to manifest the inner values that I stand for, whether it's happiness for Chitra or whether it's fairness for me, or whether it is values, universal values that no one is left behind, that each of us stands for, and that is so innate within us. When I am anchored in my universal values, I recognize my abilities. And when I recognize my abilities, I'm able to use them. When I'm anchored in my universal values of fairness, dignity, and full potential, I create a space for others to anchor themselves in their universal values, to source their universal values, and manifest their greatness. And when everyone is able to manifest greatness, we are able to draw out the abilities within us and use them appropriately. However, it is important to note that when I'm ill or when I don't experience a sense of well-being or when I'm preoccupied with other pursuits, I tend to focus less on my abilities. And that's what can hamper illness or cause distress. Let's look at this aspect of coping with normal stresses of life. Typically, life offers us hassles and life presents us with hassles and stressful situations. Whether it is, my concern about the background that I just had before the webinar began, or whether it is a doorbell that rings or care that I have to provide to family members just when I have to prepare for this, get ready for this webinar, or whether it is prolonged illness in the family that leads to a stressful situation. All of these cause stress. But you know what? The beauty of human life is to be able to cope with these stresses, routine stresses of everyday life, in a manner that is healthy and adaptive. And we are wired to respond to this in this manner. So the trick is to befriend stress, because all stress is not bad. Stress is an opportunity, our body's way of telling us that we can go for it, we can do better, and that we can definitely do, and this is a way of connecting with others. I recommend that each of us watch this TED Talk, Making Stress My Friend by Kelly McGonigal, and you will discover how we can reframe our understanding of stress and befriend it. However, when we are talking about situations that are away from the normal, whether it is the pandemic or whether it is any disaster situation, we need to draw upon extra resources both from within and from outside in order to cope with it. So like I said, this is also this creates possibility for us to tap into our support network and utilize them so that we not only cope, but we are also able to go beyond. So let's look at what working productively and fruitfully means. Work is a way of creating meaning in life. It gives us an identity, it contributes to well-being, and it gives us a purpose to live for. When I work productively and I derive a lot of joy in my work, I enhance my self-esteem. And when I'm able to enhance the self-esteem, I'm able to anchor myself in my universal values of dignity, fairness, and full potential, and other values that you and I stand for. However, what is important to note is we work in a socio-cultural context. And this socio-cultural context is the ecosystem which influences our expression of well-being, our expression of abilities and capacities, our expression of results and outputs that we generate. And therefore, it's important to also know and recognize that this ecosystem can be empowering, it can also, and facilitative, it can also be disempowering. For example, we have disempowering work norms that I am the boss and the whole, and everybody has to listen to me in my outfit. Or women cannot contribute to work as well as men do. And these disempowering norms are sources of triggers of distress. But never mind, despite all of this, the beauty of work, whether it's any kind of work, whether it's paid work, whether it's unpaid work, or whether it's caregiving work, where we care for our children, we care for the older adults in our family, all of these contribute to an immense sense of accomplishment, fulfillment, where I'm being productive and fruitful. It also fosters social connectedness, all of these which contribute to our well-being. The fourth component of mental health, which is contributing to society, relates to the service that we all undertake and we are taught to undertake. Serving is again an innate capacity that is fostered through our own volition as well as through the upbringing in our families and in our schools and in our society. Serving gives us an opportunity to be of use to society, and it can be in any form, whether it is to distribute supplies, whether it's food or water during the pandemic, or whether it is to beautify streets and monitor the clean upkeep of the street, or whether it is to serve older adults, or whether it is to serve people with specific needs. All of these add to meaning making in our lives. We note that all these four components are vital for self-worth and well-being, and therefore for mental health. Any disturbance in one aspect of our lives which causes distress can be countered by looking at other areas of life where we can be fully functional, whether it's working, whether it's utilizing our abilities, or whether it is serving. How do we actually design ways or initiatives in order to foster mental health? There are multiple ways of fostering mental health, and we are going to discuss or share with you the model proposed by Monica Sharma. So every action has certain consequences. The way we design, what we design is what we deliver. So therefore, if we are going to design partially and our actions are partial, we will also deliver partial results. What does this mean? How does this translate in everyday life? It translates in the form of when we generate partial results, the results are not enduring or they are not equitable. It doesn't provide solace or it does not take care of everybody in this world. But let's examine what these partial strategies are. When we are confronted with some issue, we need to address this issue by providing technical intervention, which is solving an immediate problem. Okay? And whether it is providing food or whether it is providing healthcare, we need to provide something. We need to be in action. We also need to understand that systems and cultural norms or systemic causes are areas in which we need to act and also address. So whether it is, making transport accessible for people to reach healthcare systems, or providing food, or activating the local mechanisms such as the public distribution system to provide food, or whether it is to take a person to the hospital and ensure that healthcare is provided. So all these are important. We need these interventions. And we have certain people who have good intentions, who really care about others, who have gone through crisis during the pandemic. And we've seen tons of examples during the pandemic when people have gone out to the street and served. All of these are important. All these three aspects are important, that I provide interventions, I alter systems and cultural norms, and I manifest what I deeply care about. However, while these responses generate results, they are only partial results. Chitra, would you like to share some partial results that when you generated partial results in your work?
Yes. See, partial strategy always yield or generate only partial results. I would like to share one such example. While working with a 5-year-old child with multiple disability at our center, our focus mainly remained on offering special education and speech therapy. The father never came for any of the counseling sessions or on any occasion either to drop the child or pick him up after the class. When I asked the mother why was it so, she said he was very busy and he had no time to attend to the child. I took this information on face value and never challenged it. My work was in silos and not interconnected at that point of time. Therefore, my results were partial and these cultural norms were not visible to me at that point of time. Hence, I was not able to address the mental health and well-being of all the members in the family. So, Srilata, for the conscious full spectrum response
Thank you
model.
very much, Chitra. So you see, the system norm that we expect, the cultural norm that we expect, that only women should take care of the children, only women should provide help, and it's the woman's job to take care of a child, and particularly a child with disability, is what was not working because the father was not participating. So in order to respond in a full spectrum manner, we use what is known as the conscious full spectrum response model, which Monica Sharma discovered over years of experience, over 3 decades of experience in 65 countries, and therefore it's a tested and tried model that has generated results worldwide and results that can be taken to scale. Now, what is this model all about? This model is all about providing solutions, whether it's counseling, whether it's food, whether it's healthcare, addressing stigma and discrimination related to disability or mental health, addressing cultural norms of only women provide household care. It's a woman's job to take care of children with disability, and a man has no responsibility at all except provide money, which in this case the man didn't provide money to, and embodying values of dignity and equity or justice or happiness that Chitra embodies. All of these are addressed at the same time simultaneously. When we adopt this model, which generates, which calls for me to source my universal values, shift unworkable systems and disempowering norms so that we make them life enhancing, and generate and produce and be in action to solve a problem. That's when I generate a full spectrum response. Chitra, how did you transform a partial response to a full spectrum response in this case?
So going by the previous example, how I use the conscious full spectrum response model to shift norms and systems in society. Sharing the same example, this mother of this 5-year-old child with multiple disability did not reveal in the first 2 to 3 occasions why her husband was not coming to the center. On further probing, I understood that her husband had substance abuse problem and the mother had to face domestic violence issues every single day at home. When the husband started disrobing her in front of their teenage daughter and this 5-year-old child with multiple disability, she came rushing to me and said, "Ma'am, something has to be done about this. My dignity is at stake." That is when I realized that I need to address mental health issues along with disability issues. It was then that Srilata went to Sai Hospital, one of the biggest hospitals in Mumbai, run by the municipal corporation, and we approached the Department of Psychiatry to initiate a community mental health clinic. So since past 2 years, since August 2018, we run a bi-monthly, a fortnightly clinic in our community. And since the last 2 years, we've been having over 350 users in our clinic. We provide diagnostic facility with the help of a psychiatrist, medicinal support with the help of a pharmacist. We have a team of social worker also attached and a counselor to the unit. Now, to make this project equitable and sustainable, I have created a group of well-being community volunteers. So this is again an inclusive group. We want to break certain isms, so we included people, parents of children with disability, people living with mental illness to break that they have the potential to perform. We have parents of people living with mental illness, social workers, special educators, counselors, the pharmacist, and the psychiatrists as a full complete team to address the mental health issue in the community. This is work in progress, and we still continue. Even during the pandemic, we've been able to continue the teleconsultancy services and pharmacist support during the pandemic to our clients.
For this powerful example of where you've interrupted isms related to violence, related to people cannot do. So when we are able to interrupt the beating up of the wife and giving dignity to that wife, And at the same time, not putting the man down, but telling him, you know what, you need help. Come on, let's get help together. So we look at, so when we're addressing stigma and discrimination, it is not to other, just because, it's not to other anybody. This is inclusion in practice. This is inclusion in action. And this is inclusion in action where we not just provide treatment by providing, or healthcare, but it is to foster all aspects of the domains of mental health where people living with mental illness are part of our well-being volunteers and giving a particular task. And when they are engaged with a particular task, we foster well-being. So can we make this enduring? So this response model ensures that there is equitable and enduring results. So we know that 5 years from now, long after, or 10 years from now, long after Chitra and I are not there in this setting, people will still carry forward their contribution to community and foster their own well-being. Can we cultivate such ambience, such ecosystems? Can we cultivate responsibility in the individual, in the family, and in the community so that well-being is fostered at all times? While this is a response model, we also need to put something in place that amplifies what is working. So therefore, Monica Sharma discovered what is known as the respond and realize framework in order for us to amplify what is not just respond to a problem, but to realize the full potential or amplify what is working. So we start off with what is it that we deeply care about? Dignity, fairness, compassion, and justice and well-being. And we respond to problems like Chitra did, provide treatment, involve people in certain activities. Along with responding to problems, we also realize the full potential of each person, each stakeholder group. And when we realize the full potential of each stakeholder group and respond to problems, we are able to generate what is known as synergistic results. So we need to do both. We need to respond to problems. We also need to realize the full potential of individuals. So we need to respond to health-related problems. We also need to foster well-being and resilience in people. We need to respond to distress and trauma, whether individual or collective, but we also need to foster well-being. We need to put in place systems with mechanisms of enhancing well-being and interrupting isms so that resilience and well-being are further enhanced. Whether it is related to isms related to excluding people, or whether it is isms related to violence. Let's hear from Chitra what isms she interrupted through her work.
Some of the disempowering isms that diminish our life that I addressed through my work in the community mental health clinic was stigma, discrimination, classism, that people from the urban slums are not entitled to treatment. It's only the rich who can afford or who can take treatment for mental health. I also give dignity and respect and operated from a space of compassion. Inclusion by enrolling people with disabilities, their families, people living with mental illness, their families as a part of my well-being volunteers was also fostering inclusion, equity, and encouraging their full potential into their work. So these are some of the isms that we need to look at while we are at work every day in our space that we work with.
Thank you, Chitra, for this powerful sharing. So therefore, Chitra moved from violence in that family, address issues of violence, but also talk about fostering harmony in that family. And harmony in families is translated as equity and peace for all of us in this world. So can we do both? Can we not just respond to the problem? So the conscious full spectrum response model responds to the problem, but can we do responding and realizing the full potential of all human beings? When we use both the conscious full spectrum response model and the response and realize framework, our ability to be in action is strengthened. The outputs and the outcomes that we generate are stronger and more enduring. How do I be in action? It's important for me to to anchor myself in my universal values, for you to anchor yourself in your universal values, because that is the only space where all of us are commonly connected. And that is the most powerful place from which, when action is generated, it leads to tangible results. That is the space from which, when we make what is invisible visible, we are able to deal with this and transcend what interrupts us or what is unworkable, and makes life and make practices more life enhancing. So can we identify and interrupt disempowering norms in our family, in our workplace, and in our society? So for example, in my house, in my family, do I share the same utensils that I eat and drink from with the domestic help who comes to my house? In my workplace, am I open to, do I value the suggestions given by people who are in positions much so-called lower than me, whether it is class 4 employees, whether it's attendants? Do I show the same respect to the gardener in my institution that I show to the director of the institution? In society, do we pay equal wages for men and women? Of course, in rural areas, I'm referring to agricultural labor. And when I'm able to interrupt these disempowering norms, I'm able to encourage coping in a healthy manner for myself and others. So in this, we are all together, but we walk our own path. And when I encourage adaptive coping, I'm able to go beyond coping and realize my full potential and work towards resilience. So therefore, I need to first recognize what are these work culture and norms that are not equitable, that put others down, that shame others, and transform them so that they are equitable and respectful. How can I serve in a manner that I contribute to community? I need to keep in mind the local cultural practices. So when we are in action, we create an ecosystem for transformation where our capacities, so the definition of mental health is manifested because recognizing, I foster well-being by recognizing my capacities or abilities. I work productively and truthfully. I contribute to the community and transcend disempowering cultural norms to create life-enhancing norms and life-enhancing practices. So, who do I choose to be? Do I choose to be in fear, or do I choose to move to learning, or do I choose to look at growth for myself largely, or do I choose to be in the giving zone, which is growth for myself and others? Chitra, how did you go through this journey?
Okay. During the pandemic, initially I was very afraid when people asked me how I can support them with relief and ration material. But I decided that I need to keep safety norms in place for myself and for my community volunteers and work over my fear. So I was able to arrange for ration and relief material for over 75 families, basically for families who had children with disability. And my volunteers did a fantastic job by keeping all the safety norms in place, by putting masks and PP suits and everything. So it was really moving from the fear to the giving zone. I was also able to break one more ism, I should say, of ableism, where I had my students writing the National Institute of Open School examination. They were supposed to write in a physical space, but due to the sudden lockdown, it had been shifted to a virtual or online examination. Initially, my fear was, even my special educator said, how are our students living in the slums with probably we don't know whether they have internet bandwidth or they will be able to learn, who is going to support them for online learning and online examination. But we decided that we will enroll the families, especially the older siblings, the parents, and give it a try. So from the initial fears of how are people students living in the slums going to write online examination, we managed to do it. We enrolled the siblings, got their internet bandwidth connected. The students went through 3 weeks of rigorous learning through another NGO partner called Pratham, and finally wrote their exams in August, and very happily completed their examinations and got their results early September. So this was basically a fear. When we move from fear to giving, it really makes a meaning making in our lives. So this was absolutely a practical example of it's recently done during the lockdown.
Thank you, Chitra. Do you realize that when Chitra designed her initiative using the conscious full spectrum response model and the the respond and realize framework template, she was able to move from fear to giving. So this work is about how do I practice this in my life, in my home, in my family, in my workplace, and in my community. For those of you who are interested in this model uh, and the radical transformation leadership tools, there is a workshop that is going to a three-part series that we are going to conduct in October, in the end of October, December, and January. And we will put these details up for you so that you can enroll for the workshop if you would like to.
Yeah, we already put it up in chat. I've already put it in chat. Maybe we can share with this thing. I've already put it with this thing, email ID in the chat.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. So now let's look at what the use of the CFSR model does. The CFSR model enables me to generate enduring, that is lasting and sustainable and equitable results. Now, this is in keeping with what the Sustainable Development Goals talk about, particularly 3, where mental health is very clearly articulated in its goals and targets and indicators. It enables me to go just beyond generating results to fostering resilience, which is an innate quality of a universal value that we all have. It gives me opportunity to use this model to care for myself and others in my family, in my workplace, and in my society by interrupting disempowering ism. And when I deal with and I challenge and interrupt disempowering ism, I'm preventing distress that comes because of this disempowering ism. Like Chitra's example. The lady whose husband would beat her up, the mother, was facing violence every day. When Chitra addressed this issue by way of providing treatment, the distress came down. And that is what we refer to as interrupting disempowering ism to prevent distress. So, what is the CFSR model? The CFSR model is a development model. It's a model for that fosters movements in mental health. It's a mental health movement for results, where I move from partial strategies to full spectrum response strategies, from mere output to outcomes, where I shift paradigms, I change norms, I shift paradigms to foster the largest good that I want to see in this world, which is resilience and full potential of all people. All of this sourced from universal values, whether it's equity, dignity, or compassion or happiness. CFSR model enables me to put into use. I mean, this model, I design my everyday action. So this model is for me to manifest this in everyday life, everywhere, and this can be used by anybody. We have used this model with our well-being volunteers who have gone to school, who've got school education only, as well as with our psychiatrists and pharmacists who have professional education as well. So this model is for us to manifest our universal values through our everyday actions at every point in time and by everybody.
Yeah. When I give myself permission to source my universal values and oneness for action and results, I will manifest my greatness and contribute in unpredictable ways. And I am the unfolding new reality and emergence in this world. Monica Sharma.
Some of the references we've used, and we just put it up to be in integrity with regard to the sources we've drawn from.
So thank you.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Jyoti.
There's one question for you, Srilata.
Jyoti will deal with this.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. That was really insightful. session. And yeah, we have a question for you. So Darshana Barua is asking, using any form of substance to get through difficult times falls under the maladaptive coping strategy category. As a mental health professional, how can you encourage adaptive coping strategy at a point in time?
Okay, so thank you for your question. And you're absolutely right that using any substances beyond a particular point when it tends to go to abuse, and particularly as a way of coping and not for recreational purpose, is certainly not okay. Now, one of the ways is, so here we look at what can we do. So we look at what are the gaps that we see in the person's ability to cope and put in place strategies for the person to cope. So how do we do that? We look at what is it that the person deeply cares about and what does the person want to manifest as a person with a purpose in life, and help that person manifest that value and that passion by way of engaging in activities and adopting strategies, altering disempowering norms, altering life diminishing practices and situations so that the person not only copes but also foster, and the person becomes far more resilient and he contributes to well-being. There are various strategies which range from enhancing coping mechanisms to CBT to we have a lot of literature in substance abuse that talks about what do you call that, dealing with the cessation of substances, etc. So there are multiple techniques that one can use. What is important for us to remember is all of these techniques generate results. Yes, yes, they do. However, if I want to make my quitting enduring, I need to deal with what is the root of the problem and help and deal with it by putting in place, by not only responding to the problem, but fostering the full potential of the individual. Thank you.
Hope that answers your question, Darshana. So yeah, there's another question from Muskan Gandhi. With the media constantly updating us with increasing COVID cases, how can I move from the fear zone to giving zone?
Yes, if you had paid, if you had, you know what, I'm going to share my screen again and show you this slide set, which actually talks about fear and 1 second. Please just give me a second. I will come to this slide set. So oftentimes you're absolutely right about sorry. You're absolutely right about the information overload we have about COVID. So if I were to move from fear to giving, when I'm in a state of fear, I also go actively seeking out information about COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, I am bombarded by news that actually comes in that causes more fear than calms me down. And therefore, I move from I stop consuming news that harms me. I regulate my watching of news. I say I will check my data, I will check news only once in a day or twice a day. And then I also vet the news because I need to know which is the right news. So therefore, I check for veracity of information. So one of the best places to go to is the government website for updates on COVID. I personally would do that rather than consuming all and every news. And you can't stop media from projecting what they're doing, but you know which source to rely on. And when I am able to be responsible about the news I consume, and when I'm able to responsibly take care of myself, that is, follow safe hygiene practices, follow physical distancing for myself and for others, and contribute to others, contribute to the community, focus on my work, I'm able to cope better with the COVID pandemic. So I'll give you a minute to look at this slide set so that you are able to see what all one does. stop screen share now?
Yeah, sure, sure.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. So hope that answers your question, Muskan. We have another question from Ravi Kumar. So he says, this is good. Thank you for sharing. In a society like our, talking about mental health has social stigma or taboo. In this case, how would an affected person will make the first step? What should he do?
What is it?
So typically when I am the affected person, let's say I have a mental illness, do people around me, that is my family, are they comfortable with my experience of mental illness? Now, mental illness does not occur overnight like an accident. Let's get
Yeah.
that very clear.
Mm-hmm.
Mental illness has some kind of a progressive onset. And so important for me, so when I'm talking about stigma is perpetuated and maintained because of disempowering practices around me, whether it's in my family, whether it's in my workplace. Let me give you the example of a young man who I worked with. And this young man no, I had multiple diagnoses. One, he had a mental illness. He also had mild intellectual disability. So this young man was able to work. His passion was to complete his education, but his illness came in the way and he could not complete his education. With support from his family, he pursued his passion and completed his bachelor's degree. And he did that over 6 years. And when people would laugh at, or his extended family would say, "Itne saal tak kar rahe ho?" His family would say, "Yeah, I mean, just like how I learned, take time to learn certain things that are new, he's taking time. What's the big deal? The fact that he's trying is more important." So, do we have champions to support us like this? Do we have people who will say, who will focus on what is working rather than focus on what is not working? We all have this deficit mindset. Can we move from what is not working to the strengths of that person? And when we look at life enhancing practices, we auto remember, because there's only so much constant energy, when you focus on what is working, your attention to what is not working automatically comes down. And when that comes down, you're creating the ecosystem of change for that person to move from wellness to illness. Remember, sorry, illness to wellness. Remember, we said that this is a continuum. So we can, so for a little hand holding by people like you and me in our family, in our workplace, and in society, so that we don't give people that gaze, oh, there's something awkward about this person, whether it's related to disability, whether it's related to, talking to self and gesticulating to self that you commonly see people with mental illness do. So if we are able to create that supportive atmosphere, that's one of the first steps to dealing with stigma. And also making what is invisible visible. And that's why we've titled it so.
Thank you, Dr. Sridhar. That was really, really insightful. And yeah, we have another question from Atri Ghosh. So they ask, what is the best coping mechanism for a single parent who has to toggle between the roles of a work from home professional and a homemaker?
Oh, well, I wish there was a one size, but there was a cookie cutter answer to this.
Mm-hmm.
Atri, right?
Yeah, Atri.
That's her name, Atri? Yes, Atri. So Atri, I wish there was a cookie cutter answer to this. I wish there was a formula to this. But you know what? The beauty about being a human being is that we all come with multiple ways of doing the same thing. And we have multiple entry points to foster coping. So what works for me may not work for you, and what works for you may not work for Chitra or for Jyoti. So therefore, the first thing is to discover what works. But before that, when I still myself and when I'm able to discover what I truly care about in this world, I'm able to then see what are those limiting factors that comes in the way of my functioning, which we call disempowering norms. When I'm able to discern, okay, that I don't have, and when I'm able to tell myself that I don't have to be the best parent. I'm human, I will make mistakes, and it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay for me not to be okay once in a while. I will prioritize. Today, I will not cook my child her favorite dish. I will not please my husband by attending to him every time today, because I have a responsibility and to keep a commitment that I did made to health of mine. So today, everybody will have to make do with khichdi for lunch, let's say. Okay. And when I prioritize, I am clear within and I engage in a conversation with people in the family, I am able to, tell myself this is what I can do today. And if I can't cook the favorite dish of my child today, I will do it tomorrow or maybe in the evening for dinner. So juggling, and fortunately, we are quite good at multitasking. And particularly in the days of pandemic, where we're all locked down and we're having to work from home. We've learned to multitask a little better, I hope. And in the process of multitasking a little better, we're able to prioritize and see what works. All this comes with a cost. Of course, I am going to be distressed. Of course, I am going to, put demands on myself. But can I be kind to myself? Because we, as women, we are taught to be caring for others, but not for ourselves. Self-care is so important, Aatve. Because if I don't care for myself, I cannot care accordingly or appropriately for my child, because I'm going to carry the burden and the excess baggage and the pile up of distress and stress that will come out in some form, like the pressure cooker, at some point in time or later. So, I mean, I will only give you some tips that could say, yes, please take care of yourself, discern, deal with cultural practices or deal with the disempowering practices in your work, in your family, in society, and take the forward. So would you like to add?
Yeah, I would like to say that let's not feel guilty about anything. Let's not take the guilt so seriously. It's okay to falter, it's okay to be honest, and ask for also external help. If you need help from the family or the neighbors or something on a particular day when you're stressed about work as a single parent, it's good to ask for help and prioritize your work. I mean, I know how much I have juggled, but probably had I known all these things, I would have lived a life a little differently earlier, with kids and family. But it's good to ask for help, and it's very, very important not to feel guilty. That as Srilata says, make the child ask for a particular dish. If you cannot do it, it's fine. You don't need to feel guilty and carry that baggage and blame ourselves for every little thing. No, I think we have to be very kind and kind to ourselves first.
Guilt. We tell our students guilt is a useless thing. Guilt only makes me feel more and more bad. It doesn't help me to shift from feeling bad to feeling good.
Thank you both. You have been doing a remarkable work from, for these many years. And it was an honor to have you both here. Thank you so much. So I think we are wrapping up now.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Health of Mind, for this opportunity.
Thank you, Health of Mind. Yes. Thank you, Jyoti.
Wishing you all a healthy, resilient, and enduring mental health.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
One more
There is
question.
one more question.
One more question.
All right. So yeah, it's from Avantika Kapadia. She says, thank you for your insightful presentation. The COVID situation has worsened the condition of those with mental illnesses. So how can individuals suffering with mental disorders in this time, keeping in mind COVID and the issues it poses, move away from using maladaptive coping mechanisms and towards more adaptive and effective coping mechanisms? So yeah.
Thank you, Avantika, because we are living in very unusual times where we are not only is our routine disrupted, but we're also having to live live with each other in our families, and deal with multiple commitments of home and work, and having to deal with exigencies in the families, whether it is an illness, whether it is a disability, doesn't matter. And because, see, there are instances where grandparents say, my TV time is taken over. Earlier, the children and the grandchildren used to go out to work or to school. I was able to watch TV. Now, children and grandchildren take precedence, and that is causing distress. So, to be able to establish differing routines, to be able to establish a routine that suits everybody's needs is something that we are constantly juggling with. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Simultaneously, when there is a person with mental illness, it is important that there are certain things that are non-negotiable. If I am on medication, I need to continue my medication. If let's say one of the symptoms of my illness or manifestation of my illness is I have what we call lethargy. I'm not able to work properly. I have a dysfunction or I have a disturbance in my functioning at home. I'm not able, or I sleep very late, or I have untimely meals. Can we ensure that we alter routine so that it is it's in synchronous with what the other family members are doing? Can we gently nudge this person to sleep early and wake up early? Can we discuss with our doctor whether we can alter the timing of the medication so that we have a medication early so that we don't wake up late?
Mm-hmm.
So we need to get into practices in simple routine practices that help us to be mindful of specific needs of people with mental illness. So the first important and foremost thing is to look at what I can do to support. So examine the routine of that person, see where we can bring in alteration, engage in conversations with that person so that you enroll that person to make these alterations and not tell that person what to do. Remember, we all have agency,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to foster the agency of that person with mental illness too. That's why we say respond to the problem, but also realize the full potential and agency of that person. So so engage in this conversation, and
Mm-hmm.
foster the agency of that person, and together identify solutions. It's not I identify solutions. Together identify solutions so that when my child with mental illness is a part of that decision making, the responsibility becomes higher. And my child will falter because of the illness, but I'm there to hold
Mm-hmm.
hands. We're there to
Right.
plug gaps, recognize these falling quickly enough so that we plug them faster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. So I would like to thank you both again and Health Home Mind especially. So
I
yeah,
think there's one more.
One more
there's one
question.
question. Wow. I think yes, there is. Oh, so yeah, this is again from Atri Ghosh. She asks, how do you deal with a peripheral schizophrenic disorder patient under medication with extreme denial of basic practicalities, to be precise, the age is 60 plus?
Uh, can you explain a little more what practicalities are? Basic practicalities are. Are you talking about performing activities of daily living, whether it's eating, sleeping, taking care of self, whether it is
Okay,
okay?
Atri, please, if you can elaborate the question.
Uh,
Yeah.
I also want to point out a couple of things here. Um, the pandemic, like somebody said, I think it was Avantika, who said that the pandemic has caused an increase also in people in manifestation of mental illness. Chitra quoted the IPS study, which says 20% increase in psychiatric illnesses. So, having said that,
Mm-hmm.
um, when we use labeling terms, okay, where we say, oh, you are ill, you are a patient. What we are doing is we are overlooking the person behind the illness.
Right.
So can we give dignity to that person and say, here is a person with schizophrenia, here's a person with dementia, here is a person with depression. Because we are people first, and then only we are all our labels that we call ourselves. No? And they're actually not labels, like I have diabetes. You're not going to call me a diabetic person all the time. I function better. I function even without being called a diabetic. I just have to take care of myself. Like a person living with mental illness has to follow has to follow certain precautionary measures. It's the same thing. The reason why we do not function well is because we let it pass for far too long, that Therefore, the deficits have gotten more and more crystallized and harder for us to deal with. So that's why I said when can we monitor the daily routines of people together, people with mental illness, so that we recognize when the person is slipping and deal with it then and there rather than wait for it to accumulate and pile up and pile up and pile up till it's far too gone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So one
Yeah.
of the ways of doing this is, if I want to look at, if I would, I'm presuming that when you talk of basic practicalities, I'm presuming that you're talking about daily living. So let us say that the person cannot eat. I mean, cannot have a shower, does not go for a shower every day. Okay. So, or personal hygiene. So what can I do to make having a shower motivating for that person? So can I say, okay, when you have a shower and come, then we shall have something. We can have something that you really like. And a lot of times you can sleep for longer after you have a shower. So identify what is it that you can reinforce so that the desired behavior of having a shower or personal hygiene is encouraged. Okay, that is one way. There are many ways of doing this. Fortunately, some of our cultural practices say that without shower you can't pray. Okay, I'm just assuming here. Okay, so say, and if the person really likes to pray, then say, you can't pray without a shower, so quickly go have a shower, then we can pray. So find ways in which you can motivate the person and enroll the person to doing things that both of you want to do, not just what you want the person to do. Okay.
So yeah. And being a psychologist, I couldn't agree more, ma'am. So thank you everyone for joining us today, the
Thank you.
panelists, the audience, and I would like to thank Health of Mind also.